Saturday night, Berlin. The lights are on. And 2 hours later, Eala is walking off the court having lost. 6-2, 6-4. Straight sets. The semi-final is over, and so is her run at this tournament. That is the headline. That is the version most people will scroll past on their way to the next video. But something does not add up if you actually stop on it. 2 nights before that loss, she beat the world number 2 player. The very next night, she beat the world number 8. Back to back. Almost no recovery time in between. Against 2 women who had spent years being the ones other people were afraid of, not the other way around. And she was the one standing across the net from both of them. So here's the real question worth asking before anything else. Why does a loss like this one get talked about more than most wins do? What Eala was actually supposed to do in Berlin to understand that, you have to understand what Eala was actually supposed to be doing in Berlin in the first place. A wild card is not a real opportunity. Not in the way people imagine it. It is tennis's version of a courtesy invite. You get the spot because somebody in the tournament office likes your potential, not because anyone genuinely expects you to do real damage. The unwritten deal is simple. You show up, you get some experience against better players, maybe you steal one match if everything lines up perfectly, and then you go home quietly before the tournament gets serious enough for anyone to remember your name. That was supposed to be Eala's week in Germany. Low expectations, zero real pressure, the kind of invisible status where commentators mispronounce your name in the first round and never bother correcting themselves because they do not expect to need to say it again. And here is the strange part about that invisibility. It usually works against a player. This time it became something closer to an advantage. Nobody scouts a wild card the night before a match. Nobody sits in a coaching box with a notepad trying to map out how to break her serve. She walks onto the court as a question mark. And elite players genuinely hate question marks, because you cannot properly prepare for something you do not fully understand yet. So she walked into Berlin unscouted, unseated, mostly unnoticed. And then she simply did not lose early, the way the script said she was supposed to. The match against Rybakina, when the script stopped making sense, waiting for her in the second round was Elena Rybakina, world number 2. A serve that has personally ended the momentum of dozens of opponents before they ever found their footing. 3 aces in the very first game of that match alone. The kind of opening built to make you feel like the outcome is already decided before you have even settled into your legs. For a handful of games, it looked exactly like everyone expected. The favorite pulling ahead, the gap in ranking finally showing itself the way gaps usually do. Then it stopped looking that way. Straight sets. Eala won that match in straight sets against one of the heaviest servers anywhere in the sport. That result does not happen by accident. It happens because somewhere in the middle of that match, and almost nobody noticed exactly when, she stopped playing like someone hoping to survive the moment and started playing like someone who had already quietly decided she belonged inside it. Less than 24 hours later, with barely enough time to process what had just happened, she walked back out and did it again. Alina Svitolina. This time, a completely different kind of danger. Less about overwhelming power and more about patience. About testing a young player's nerve long before testing her forehand. Eala won that one too. 2 wins. 2 entirely different styles of opponents solved in 2 entirely different ways. Both ranked far above where she sat in the draw that week. Both eliminated by the time the weekend arrived. By Saturday, the cameras that had ignored her court during the first round were following her everywhere. People who had never once said her name out loud were typing it into search bars at 1 in the morning, trying to understand exactly who this was and how she had done what she had just done, twice, in 2 nights against players who were not supposed to lose to someone like her. And then Noskova happened. Clean. Decisive. The run ending exactly where the cruelest version of this story always seems to end, 1 match short of the final, with the whole thing suddenly painfully visible. If you stop the story right there, it reads like simple heartbreak. A good week that fell 1 match short of something bigger. But that is the smallest, most surface-level version of what actually happened on that grass court in Berlin. And it completely misses the part of the story that actually matters, because none of it, not really, was ever about a trophy. The one thing that actually separates elite players from everyone else. Here is something worth sitting with for a moment, because it explains more about that week than any scoreline ever could. Why do players ranked in the top 10 usually beat players ranked 20 or 30 spots below them, even on days when the lower-ranked player is hitting the ball just as cleanly, moving just as well, doing everything right on paper? It is rarely about the strokes themselves. It is about belief. And belief is, without question, the single hardest thing to manufacture in elite sport. You can drill a serve for hours every single day. You can make your footwork so automatic that your feet move before your brain even finishes the thought. But you cannot fake the feeling of standing across the net from a top player and knowing, not hoping, knowing, deep in your body, that you belong inside that rally with her. Most players who walk into a match like that simply have not earned that feeling yet. Some part of them has already decided how the story ends long before the first point is even played. You can see it sometimes in body language alone. A slightly slower walk between points. A flinch on a big swing. The unmistakable look of someone who is already bracing for the loss before it has actually happened. Eala did not walk into that Rybakina match carrying that story. Watch how she actually played that opening set, not the highlight reel version, but the pattern sitting underneath it. She was not playing defense, praying to survive long enough to sneak out a single set against a server that dangerous. She was getting Rybakina's biggest weapon back in play. Point after point. Not winners, just contact. Just enough depth on the ball to force a player who is used to finishing rallies in 3 shots into hitting a 4th one. Sometimes a 5th. That is not panic. That is patience under genuine fire. Which is an entirely different skill from patience when nothing real is actually on the line. And here is the tactical detail that actually explains what happened, the part that almost never makes it into a recap because it does not show up cleanly in a stat sheet. Absorbing pace from a server that heavy has very little to do with swinging back harder. It is about timing. Getting the racket face on the ball a fraction of a second earlier than instinct wants to allow. Redirecting depth across the court instead of trying to match raw power with more raw power. It is a skill that takes years for most players to fully trust under real pressure. In a match where the next miss might end everything, she trusted it against the world number 2. One hesitation in that match, just one, and it likely ends in 20 minutes instead of 2 sets. She did not hesitate. The Philippines was not a wait. It was the opposite. Now here is where it is worth slowing down and correcting something because it is the part of the story people tend to get wrong without meaning to. There is a temptation to talk about the pressure of representing an entire country. The weight of millions of eyes back home. An invisible flag sitting on her shoulders every single time she walks out to serve. That is not actually what was happening in Berlin that week. And it matters to be precise about why. The Philippines was not a weight on her during that run. It was the opposite of a weight. It was an entire country standing fully behind her, loudly, asking for absolutely nothing in return. Not a trophy, not a ranking jump, nothing conditional attached to their support at all. That kind of unconditional presence does not add pressure to a player's shoulders. If anything, it quietly removes a certain kind of fear. The specific fear of disappointing people who would have been disappointed regardless of the result. Nobody back home needed her to win Berlin in order to already be proud of her. They already were, long before she won a single match in that draw. So if there was real pressure sitting in that stadium, it was not arriving from outside at all. It was coming from somewhere much quieter. The pressure of having just proven something enormous to herself against Rybakina and then having to ask her own body almost immediately to prove it all over again, against a completely different kind of opponent, with almost no time to even fully sit with what she had just accomplished the night before. That is a far heavier weight than any flag could ever be. It is the weight of meeting a brand new standard you just set for yourself before you have even had time to fully believe it is real. Svitolina. The match that tested something deeper. Svitolina does not give young players room to settle into a rhythm. She probes first. Tests nerve long before she tests skill. Because she has learned across a long career that this is usually exactly where matches like this one actually get decided. Not in the legs, in the head. For a full set, it genuinely looked like the run might finally hit its ceiling right there in that match. Svitolina pushed relentlessly, found the small cracks that veterans always seem to find, and made Eala fight for every single point instead of allowing the match to settle into any kind of comfortable pattern. But here is what separated this performance from a player simply riding a hot week of lucky bounces. Pressure did not crack her. It clarified her. Every single time Svitolina raised the stakes, Eala matched the intensity instead of retreating from it. That is not the profile of a wild card catching a few good breaks. That is the profile of a player discovering, live, in real time, in front of a stadium that kept getting louder by the game, exactly how far her own tennis actually extends once it is truly tested. 2 wins. 2 entirely different problems to solve on consecutive nights. One opponent built to overpower you physically. One built to outlast you mentally. She solved both with her legs already running on fumes by the time the second match even started. That is the part that should genuinely unsettle the rest of the tour. Not the results themselves, the fact that neither result depended on a particular matchup breaking her way. What Noskova actually exposed on Saturday night, so by the time Saturday finally arrived with Noskova standing across the net under those same stadium lights, this was not really a question about whether Eala belongs against elite competition anymore. That question had already been answered decisively, twice, in front of a full house. What Saturday actually tested was something else entirely. Whether a body that had already given everything it had across 2 brutal back-to-back nights had anything genuine left in reserve for a third. Noskova did not expose a gap in class on that court. She exposed a cost. 2 consecutive wins over ranked opponents do not simply disappear into a record book once the match ends. They live somewhere else entirely, in legs that never fully recovered between matches, in a nervous system that was asked to peak twice within 48 hours, in the small half-second of hesitation that was not there 2 nights earlier but is now. By Saturday night, Eala was not playing a noticeably worse version of the player who had beaten Rybakina and Svitolina that same week. She was playing the exact same player, just with considerably less left in the tank, against an opponent who walked in fresh, sharp, and aggressive from the very first point of the match. Sensing correctly that fatigue might do half the work for her. That is not a story about limits. That is a story about price. And it is a price that only gets handed to players who are good enough to have earned the right to pay it in the first place. What Berlin actually changed before this particular week, Eala was a name casual fans half recognized from a highlight clip or a passing mention. Promising. Occasionally dangerous on a good day, the way a lot of talented young players are occasionally dangerous. The kind of player you describe using words like eventually, or someday, or down the road. Always future tense. Always one step removed from the actual conversation about who matters right now. Berlin erased that future tense completely. You do not call someone a prospect after she beats a top 2 player in straight sets on a surface that exposes weakness instantly. You do not call someone potential after she does it again the very next night against a battle-tested veteran who has made an entire career out of ending exactly these kinds of storybook runs before they go too far. Those 2 wins were not a glimpse of what Eala might eventually become. They were proof, undeniable and already on the record, of exactly who she already is right now. Delivered against players who had every reason in the world to make absolutely sure she was not. And that kind of proof does not quietly expire just because a third match, days later, with her body running on empty, went the other way. Why belief compounds, and why that matters for everyone watching here is the part worth genuinely understanding about belief in this sport, because it is the actual story sitting underneath everything that happened in Berlin. It compounds over time. It does not show up once, prove itself, and then disappear back into uncertainty. A player who has already beaten a world number 2 does not forget what that specific feeling was like the very next time she is standing across the net from someone ranked that high. It lives inside her now. The same way the return timing she discovered against that serve lives permanently inside her hands. It tends to show up later, sometimes months later, in a tiebreak nobody outside her own team expected her to win. It shows up in the calm of her walkout for a warm-up against a name that used to feel completely untouchable a year earlier. Belief stays quiet right up until the exact moment it stops being quiet at all. So yes, the loss still hurts. Falling 1 match short of her first WTA 500 final after a week built exactly like that one is its own very particular kind of heartbreak. The kind that does not fully leave a person once the stadium empties out and the lights finally go down for the night. But almost every truly great career has a week somewhere inside it that looks exactly like this one. Not a trophy, a revelation. A tournament where a player finally stops quietly wondering whether she belongs among the very best in the world and instead finds out in real time, in front of absolutely everyone, that she already does. Wimbledon is next, and everything has changed. Wimbledon is just ahead now. Same surface, a considerably bigger stage, and a very different version of Eala walking into it than the one who arrived in Berlin as little more than an afterthought in someone else's draw sheet. Before this week, opponents looked across the net and saw a wild card they felt no real need to prepare for. That player simply does not exist anymore. Now they see someone who beat a top 2 player and a top 8 veteran on back-to-back nights on this exact grass, mere weeks before the one tournament that matters most all year. That is not a name you casually overlook anywhere in a draw. That is a name you account for. She leaves Berlin without lifting a trophy. But every so often a tournament hands a player something quieter than a trophy and considerably more dangerous to everyone else left on tour. The tested, undeniable knowledge that she has already done this against the very best in the world and can absolutely do it again. That is the story from Berlin, and we will be with you for every chapter that follows. This is Tennis Unfiltered.